Hello and welcome to the next plenary session of the Canadian Union. My name is Rorschach. I'm the Speaker of the House of Commons. Together with me we have the honourable members of the Parliament and at the same time citizens and interested residents that they arrived to listen to today's session. Without further ado, we will be moving directly to the first House of Motions bill introduced by the government in this case here. It is a motion for the House of Commons to consider. The bill will be submitted, or the motion, sorry for that, will be submitted under Parliament for your review, honourable members. Hello and welcome to the next session. I will go ahead and read the motion for you and I will open the floor for debate. With that being said, the House motion of the 11th of May 2020, presented by the Prime Minister of the nation, Mr. Ontario, states the following. This House, recognizing the need for the maintenance and preservation of the security of Enadia, call on the Government of Enadia to take action pertaining to the Assembly of Regions, while exercising the sovereign rights of this House. This House does hereby condemn the undemocratic nature of the Assembly of Regions, Council of Regions, who are exercising powers that they do not have the constitutional right to exercise. The second motion. This House, recognizing the need for the maintenance and preservation of the security of Enadia, call on the Government of Enadia to take action pertaining to the AOR, while exercising the sovereign rights of this House. This House does hereby condemn the undemocratic nature of the Assembly of Regions Court, who have failed to uphold and preserve the freedoms of Enadians by allowing malicious intent to be taken illegally in the Council of Regions. With that, I conclude the read of the motion and I open the floor for discussion, unless the Prime Minister has a statement to make before we open up the floor.
One and number two, Mr. Speaker.
I'm sorry?
Two statements. One, well, the same statement for both motions.
Thank you. I apologize for that, as it seems like I'm having some network issues. Please, Mr. Prime Minister, you may go ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is the view of the Canadian government following a day that can only be described as a calamitous affair, starting when the Assembly of Regions Court first ruled that the Canadian Union was required to present our electoral rolls 6 hours earlier than said previous deadline. Several members were present when Enadia challenged this directly through diplomatic channels. Unfortunately, it was the view of the court that Enadia was ruling to submit them by 6 p.m. this evening, but the court seemed to have reversed that decision unilaterally without consultation of said member state. That was only the emerge over the next 12 or so hours. So this evening, Enadia was subject in the Assembly of Regions to what can only be described as in which Enadia was singled out for attack by the frankly embittered member states of the AOR and the AOR Commission of this government, that the Commission has acted with intent that can only be described as bad faith and malicious. It is our intention, therefore, this House, through the sovereignty it has over the region of Enadia, to enact the motions number 1 and number 2, calling the two institutions responsible for the into the history of Enadia. We will propel them there with due diligence, while inferring the to procedure, democracy, and basic constitutional freedoms. I defended Enadia myself in court, joined by the Honourable Liz Bain, the Electoral Commissioner, and Solicitor General, and I had consultation with the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice during the process. It was clear to us that the AOR accepted the action taken in the Council of Regions did not exist. The Chief Justice, in fact, concurred with Enadia's argument that only the Council of Regions, being supplement to a constitutional amendment, would have been able to do what they undertook. Because, in fact, it is the case that the House of Delegates is the sole something it would appear that the AOR itself was not aware of until the Canadian government raised it in court. It would seem, though, that and vicarious nature of the case suggested to us in what I can only describe as sheer contempt procedure with the obsession with Swiss law, despite our arguments being made in Swiss law, not to their knowledge. I'm sure the House will find that one.
You're here.
Suggests a need for Enadia to take the actions that the House, I hope, will approve this evening. So the government is asking of Regents Council, who failed to allow members of the Assembly of Regents Council to debate the motion they were presented with. The chairman of the council moved straight for the Canadian representative or the representative of any member state to make arguments in debate. And I'm sure, as you're all aware, in a democracy, we do not silence, we discuss. Could learn from us on that one, in my view. The consideration that despite the illegal nature of the very motion itself, as the Chief Justice dissented from his two co-justices who argued that the Assembly of Regents Council could simply assume powers it did not have. It was the Chief Justice who agreed fully with the argument that the House of Delegates was the sole legal body able to initiate legislation or vote and therefore impose it upon member states. Was intentionally biased against Enadia. The line of questioning adopted by Mr. Justice Howell suggested that when he inferred, completely ignoring the argument, the AOR Council could do what it liked. And that's simply not the case. I will draw to an end now, Mr. Speaker, by drawing the attention of Canadians to the final. As you will note, the text is slightly different. It is the job of the AOR court to uphold the Constitution, not to reinvent AOR. There are no grounds in said Constitution that allow for a member state to be expelled from the Assembly of Regents. Essentially, the court has taken the law. When a court creates a law, it is acting as legislator. And legislator is not the role of the AOR court as defined in the. Therefore, it is my pleasure, and of course great sadness at the same time, to commend these motions to this honourable House, who, unlike those, he believes in democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. With that being said, honourable members of the Parliament, the House is open for discussion, and we have already a couple of hands that have been risen. I would suggest to the honourable members of the Parliament to continue raising their hands in the Parliament section. With that being said, I will be giving the ability to speak to the honourable member Cheshire, so they can raise their voice, and they will be followed by Mr. Lincoln, Mr. Orange, and Mr. Ravenwood. Honourable Member Cheshire, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do not like to have to speak here today under such circumstances, but it is my solemn duty, as it is of every member of this House, to do so. Members of the Assembly of Regents first attempted to delay the elections to the House of Delegates because Enadia was receiving a special dispensation regarding ballot counting when Southfield in India received a similar dispensation to the election prior, which I think we can agree is pretty clear bias against Enadia on the AOR's behalf. Then they had to expand the voting window by 12 hours due to their own misgivings in order to ensure that all nations within member regions received their ballots. After this, the AOR then demanded that the Canadian government hand them the voter records by 6 AM BST, else they would ignore all votes cast by Canadian citizens. Mr. Speaker, this is a disgrace and frankly an insult to democracy. The Assembly of Regions do not have the right to pick and choose the voters, Mr. Speaker. They have a duty to recognise the voting rights of all Canadian citizens, and we're willing to forfeit that duty if we didn't provide them with information at an unreasonable hour. I am frankly outraged at the nerve that the Assembly displayed in this election, Mr. Speaker. They seem desperate to stop Canadians voting at every turn. The course of the AOR, Mr. Speaker, is one that I find amusing. 2 of their 3 justices come from regions that benefited from a previous electoral dispensation, and yet now that Enadia has requested a similar dispensation, it is all of a sudden illegal. Mr. Speaker, this is just the latest example of the AOR's clear vendetta and bias against Enadia. The AOR's own government has expressed its disdain for Enadia in conversations I have had with them. Their refusal to put the security of AOR member nations above their petty wish to push Enadia aside is repugnant, Mr. Speaker. They refuse to remove the August and Android V2 bots, despite several requests from the Canadian Ministry of Justice, but they do so after an investigation carried out by my office. Clearly, they only care about their self-interest, not the well-being of their voters. I wish I could say there was not more, Mr. Speaker. However, there is. The government of the AOR did nothing to stop an illegal investigation by the head of their technical team into baseless allegations against Enadia. And then, Mr. Speaker, we come to today. The AOR government and council then violate their very own constitution to try and be rid of Enadia because we exercise our rights afforded to us under their own constitution. The AOR councilmen Andra State and Clavina attempted a motion to expel us in the Council of Regions from the Chancellor and Vice-Chancellor, bypassing the checks and balances of debate and the House of Delegates. They claim to have evidence, Mr. Speaker, yet they do not present it. They claim we have broken their rules, omitting our right to a free and fair trial. Mr. Speaker, this is a sham and quite frankly disgraceful. The AOR government has, with this one single act, forfeited its right to claim that it is a democratic institution. I would, however, like to briefly thank the AOR's Court's Chief Justice for his devotion to democratic principles, unlike other members of the Assembly of Regions. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I thank this government for bringing these motions to the House to help make sure that Enadia, once again, is a truly democratic region that serves as a bastion to those nations being oppressed by the disgraceful behaviour of the Assembly of Regions. I yield the floor.
Here.
Here.
Well put.
Thank you, Honourable Member Cheshire, and thank you for exercising your democratic freedoms and raising your voice in this honourable House. And thank you, everybody, for your amazing job. With that being said, Mr. Cato, I would like you to take care of your microphone, as several members have raised their concerns in regards to the volume, but at the same time, it is open during the sessions. I
apologise, Mr. Speaker. However, I think that my enthusiasm for this subject is already known, and I hope that members of the Parliament and citizens will forgive me for perhaps allowing my motivations and my enthusiasm about this topic to have perhaps taken a step too far.
I can only assure you that your enthusiasm transfers and travels to every corner of our globe tonight. Thank you. With that being said, I will be moving the floor and the microphone, in this case here, to the Secretary of State, Mr. Lincoln. Thank you.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, I don't have so much a speech, Mr. Speaker, as a question, but I would like to put on the record my own personal disgust with the actions of the AOR. However, would the Prime Minister agree with me that we can no longer work with the AOR in a constructive manner and that our dealings with them must come to an end?
Here.
Here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Orangemane, please, sir.
What I'd like to bring up is that I don't really see, rather than talking about why we wish to condemn the AOR, why don't we take this to the next level? We, as Lincoln has said, why are we still working at the AOR? They have done nothing to cooperate with us, and not only that, they've committed numerous illegal actions, including investigating our citizens and just shenanigan after shenanigan from the courts. Heck, I haven't seen this kind of functionality since I lived in Thracia. And heck, they might even make the Thracians look competent. At least when they wanted to go after people, they did it right over there. And so, what I'm confused about is, A, why are we still in the AOR? But more importantly, I wonder why don't we immediately take the steps today in this Parliament to focus on leaving the AOR as soon as possible. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
If I may respond to the two questions, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Prime Minister, I would wish to give the floor to Ravenwood before you can respond to that. They've been waiting for quite significant time.
No problem.
If this is urgent, you can take the floor, though.
No, it's fine.
All right, Mr. Old Ravenwood, the floor is yours, sir.
All right, Mr. Speaker, honorable members of this parliament, I don't have more arguments to put. I believe everything put forth is completely valid about how the AOR has misused its democratic power to harm Enadia and not benefit it. And even from someone who was relatively supportive of the AOR in the past, I believe this action of denying Enadians their democratic constitutional right to be able to vote and participate in elections, and the court being able to legislate new practices instead of enforcing the ones already outlined in the Constitution, is absolutely worthy of the actions being taken forth by this House, and I hope we can move forward with this. Thank you. I yield my time.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
I thank the honourable members for their contributions. Very poignant speech there from Mr. Cheshire. I do give him dear compliment. I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, the Secretary of State, when he says that the AOR has provided no constructive basis for Enadian cooperation. Enadia is a region that puts people first. And I think it's clear, Mr. Speaker, as pointed out by my my honourable friend, Old Ravenwood, it is clear to us and to all, I think, who look upon the AOR's smouldering dumpster fire of the last 3 weeks, which include the same as every Canadian. It is clear that only through democratic and legitimate action can decisions be taken. And I think it's clear to all of us that the AOR doesn't value democracy. It doesn't care about democracy. And frankly, and I'm afraid to say it, it doesn't care about the views of this House. This House requested that the AOR comply with legislation as duly requested via member states' legislative authority. The AOR to this day have failed to comply with legislation that this House requested and they confirmed they would comply with. The AOR, again, back to our old chestnut, talking about the Honourable Member Cheshire, talking about the AOR's Augustine Android bot neurotics, I think would be a fair way of putting it, suggest again the contempt for the member state. It is vital that after this House, which I very much have confidence it will, approves these two motions, move to support the government's AOR referendum bill, a one-line bill that will trigger an immediate referendum into the practices of the AOR and give Canadians a say once and for all on whether or not they would like to continue to engage with, in my view, Mr. Speaker, a frankly contemptible organization that does not work in the interests of Enadia. It is the job of this government to fight for Canadians, and this government will continue that fight, Mr. Speaker. I yield the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. With that being said, the floor will be moving to another honourable member of the House and Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Axodius.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, this statement comes after a long consideration period that I have spent with many of those ministers who are in this voice chat, many other Enadians, and indeed people outside of Enadia who I have spoken with in real life. The simple fact of the matter is that the Assembly of Regions, for all of their declarations of supporting interregional cooperation, has at every turn impeded me in my efforts as a foreign affairs minister to facilitate cooperation between regions. Instead, they have remained hostile and belligerent towards our government at worst, and suspicious and uncooperative at best. When it comes to dealing with this government. The simple issue is that even in the eyes of someone who has no relation to Enadia whatsoever, and indeed no relation to nation states whatsoever, the AOR is, and to quote this individual directly, appears to be a collection of individuals with no grasp on reality and no grasp of diplomacy whatsoever.
Here for Mrs. Briggs.
Therefore, I, as Foreign Affairs Minister, in the name of furthering the foreign relations and interregional cooperation of Enadia, pledge to support the government's motion for ensuring a referendum into our continued engagement with the Assembly of Regions. The simple fact of the matter is that, fellow Enadians, it is time for us to stop being a member state, and it is time for us to become a region again.
Yeah.
Thank you. With that being said, honourable members, I will be passing the floor once again to the honourable member Cheshire upon request, and we'll be moving with the Secretary of State, Mr. Lincoln, afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, isn't it funny? When I first stood in this Parliament and said that I would advocate for an independence referendum from the Assembly of Regions, many members of this chamber laughed. They said that the AOR would work for Enadia's benefit. Well, who is laughing now, Mr. Speaker? Many of those same members now support independence from the Assembly of Regions. The Assembly of Regions has proven its undemocratic nature, and I must say it is a really great sight to see so many honourable and right honourable members of this Parliament agree with my views, because frankly the AOR's reign of tyranny over Enadian citizens and their lives will at long last come to an end. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I do also say that if we do indeed pass the bill today, as well as these motions, I hope that my right honourable friends in the government will join me in making the 11th of May go down in history as Enadia's Independence Day. I yield the floor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I don't know if it is funny, but I find it extremely funny that we have the new Nigel Farage of Enadia with us, and with that,
Funnily enough, Mr. Speaker, that is exactly what I was going for. I quoted the great man himself.
and I'm very happy that you actually did. With that being said, I'll be moving the floor to the honourable member Orange Main, sir.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
I'm listening.
You said that you would give the Secretary of State for Interior Affairs the floor after my statement.
That is correct.
That is correct. I apologize for that. I overstepped the conversation. Mr. Lincoln, I apologize for that, sir, and the floor is yours.
That's all right, Mr. Speaker. It's only a short one. I just want to say, would the Prime Minister, and by extension the whole House, agree with me that the fact we are willing to put this matter to a vote, even after everything that's happened, shows how much this region values democracy compared to the AOR?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Orange.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I would just like to talk to all the people that are somewhat like me in the sense that they do approve of interregional organizations. Now, I'm a person who does firmly believe that there is good promise and potential in these organizations. But here at the AOR, I do not see potential. I do not see something that's worth for either myself or Enadia. I see corruption, instability, and pure incompetence. And so for those who are supportive of these interregional organizations, just look at AOR for 1 second and think, how the hell can Enadia still be part of this?
Here.
And so that's the argument I'm presenting. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm just presenting the argument to why even those that don't share the Nigel Farage of Enadia's views on interregional organizations should support both this Parliament and this referendum.
Here.
Thank you. I'll be transferring the floor to the Secretary of State, Exodius, the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to concur with the points made by my honorable friend, Orange Mane, and would like to further state that I believe that at the end of the day, all Enadians remain firmly committed to the goal of spreading democracy throughout nation states. Democracy is a key aspect of the Enadian identity and is something that, in our own way, strive to champion moving forward. However, the simple fact of the matter is the electoral corruption in which the Assembly of Regions has recently been engaged in leaves little to no doubt in my mind that this organization that while claiming to support democracy in nation states does not in fact live up to this promise, in conjunction with several incidents that have occurred throughout our tenure in government and more broadly throughout Enadia's membership in the AOR, with the Assembly of Regions either turning a blind eye to authoritarianism or actively participating in it. If we are to continue to support the core Enadian value of democracy, then unfortunately, I regret to say that we can no longer maintain ourselves as in cooperation with this organization that has so many times proven that they are unwilling to work towards a more democratic future. Without this sort of assurance from them, how can we be certain that the Assembly of Regions will not try to compromise our own Enadian values? We cannot be. I will answer this question for you. We cannot be certain. And this is why every Enadian, regardless of your view on the reformists, regardless of your view on the new government, regardless of your view on interregional organizations, on politics, whatever disagreements we may have held in the past, that does not matter now when the core spirit of Enadia, the spirit of democracy, of justice, and of individual liberty comes under threat from this authoritarian organization. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish to provide a gentle reminder to the House of in this case here, sorry for that, to the House of Commons, as well as to the people who are reviewing this session. Please keep your microphones closed until you have assumed the floor, and that goes for the House of Commons, and for the viewers, please keep your microphones down as you're interrupting the speakers. With that being said, the floor will be moving once again to the honourable member and our friend in this House of Commons, Mr. Cheshire, and then to the Secretary of State, Mr. Lincoln.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have just one thing to say that I think the entire House will agree with me on here. I beg to move the question do now be put.
Second.
Thank you. But before we move any further, I would like to give to the Secretary of State the chance to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I would just like to put on record that we have complied and we have attempted to be diplomatic towards the AOR. I recall letters I sent myself to them regarding various directives, and they were always of an appropriate tone, yet they have shown that we can no longer work with them, and I absolutely support a referendum on this matter, and I also beg to move, Mr. Speaker.
Second.
Thank you. The matter will go on a vote, and you may cast your votes now. Okay, I understand. We will need one more vote, so I will extend this. I will extend this to 15 hours for that. Since
you won't need it, Secretary of State, when he comes back from the toilet or the Exodius.
That's an amazing record right there. Okay. With that being said, I beg the floor to move to the second motion that we have in this case here, and the referendum, until the honourable member is back. Do I have a second?
Mr. Speaker, we actually have to conduct two votes on this issue. One for motion 1 and one for motion 2.
Absolutely. Okay. So motion 2 is also up for vote. We have 5 votes. I'm expecting more.
Keith.
When the whip doesn't vote on the bill they're supposed to whip.
The Secretary of State should bring us the quorum when he returns.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So until they're back in this case here, and we're uncertain as to the extent of the time frame that they will need to get back, I beg the floor to move to the second proposed regulation in this case here, and the referendum introduced by the cabinet. Mr. Prime Minister, are you okay with that?
Yep, I will be presenting.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you like me to read, or would you like to read it yourself?
I'll read it myself, Mr. Speaker. It's a one-line bill, pretty simple stuff there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You may go ahead.
Just get the text. Okay, got it. All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As members will be aware, the AOR referendum bill has been presented to this House by the government as a prelude, precodification to the. I do apologise to the debate response that we have just concurred. The bill reads as follows: This House does hereby empower the Government of Enadia and the Enadian Electoral Commission to hold an immediate referendum on AOR membership. This referendum will commence at 2200 hours on the 11th of May 2020. Mr. Speaker, I do not feel there is need for lengthy debate on this particular bill following the debate on the motions regarding AOR condemnation. I believe that most of the arguments as presented in this House are absolutely applicable, however, and it is vital that Canadians have their say and allow this great region of ours to break free from the shackles of tyranny onto the green pastures of freedom anew. I commend this bill to the House.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. With that being said, I can already sense that Mr. Cheshire would like to second the motion in this case here. Is that correct?
Indeed it is, Mr. Speaker. I would like to also follow it up with a quick statement, if I may.
Absolutely, yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to say to my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, how refreshing it is to find a leader of a regional government that has kept his word to the voters. I have asked the Prime Minister many times in this House now, as I'm sure the entire region is all too aware, if when the time came, he would support me in campaigning for a referendum on Canadian membership of the Assembly of Regions. And lo and behold, Mr. Speaker, that referendum is now upon us. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for recognising the need for this bill and bringing it before the House. That is why, Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that we suspend any further debate and we proceed to an immediate vote on the bill.
Yeah.
Granted. You may cast your votes. And I will be postponing that for 15 hours, so we can have a full vote in this case here.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
Point of order. In the eventuality, due to the time restriction in the Act, should the bill receive a quorum within the next hour,
it will be
the government would like to move ahead immediately.
Yes, it will be considered immediately passed in that case there. I assure you of that. Under my
Thank you, Mr.
speakership,
Speaker.
it's going to be immediately passed in that case there. With that being said, we have 2 bills in this case here that have been postponed, and 2 proposals actually that have been postponed to 15 hours, so we can have more honourable members speak and cast their votes. Upon the passage of at least one more vote, those proposals will be considered passed. And in this case here, we just have a quorum. With that being said, we have a third proposal in this case, Mr. Prime Minister?
Oh, I'm simply pointing out to the Secretary of State he needs to vote aye to 3 bills, not just 2.
Okay, absolutely. I wasn't understanding the context. Alrighty, Mr. Cheshire, I see that you would like to take the floor once again, correct?
Yes, I would indeed, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to formally request that the Prime Minister immediately convey to the supposedly democratic Chancellor of the Assembly of Regions and the supposedly democratically elected Vice Chancellor, in addition to their abhorrently undemocratic Council of Regions, their soon-to-be sitting House of Delegates, their court, the heads of the member region governments, and to the citizens of the Assembly of Regions, that the Parliament of Enadia has authorised a referendum on its membership and will immediately begin to its campaigning, and that I am sure that they can expect the Prime Minister to come to them in about 24 to 48 hours, informing them that the Enadian people have overwhelmingly voted to leave the Assembly of Regions.
I'll respond to that, Mr. Speaker.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I once again thank the honourable member for his enthusiasm. It is always refreshing to see a bit of oomph in the chamber for once. The government does take the view that following the passage of this act, the Secretary of State for the Interior Department, Mr. Lincoln, will write to the AOR Interior Department and inform them, as is required in this government's view, of the immediate triggering of the referendum. Following, if the Canadian people do decide to vote to leave, this government will undertake via the execution of a formal letter, as the member has requested, notification that Enadia intends to withdraw. Should Canadian citizens, however, and it is always a however in these points, decide they wish to remain in the AOR, this government will issue a letter notifying the AOR to that extent. Though I am doubtful that will be the outcome, I will put on record that this government will carry out the will of the Canadian people. No ifs, no buts. As it said, the ultimate arbiter of decision-making is the people, and the people will have their say. I commend this statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry for that. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister.
Hear, hear. Ontario for Speaker.
I apologize for that, honourable members. With that being said, I'm cautious as to closing basically the argument to this thing, to the last final statement presented by the Prime Minister, and I would like to apologize in advance to the coughing honourable member Cheshire for having their microphone open in this case here. I would like, though, to continue without providing any more statements, because I believe that this concludes basically the basis and everything we need to know in regards to that. So I would like to thank the Prime Minister, and I would like you to give a warm amount of applause for the government and the work that they conducted, and for Prime Minister Ontario.
Hear, hear.
Deathly silence. Thank you, everyone.
Hear, hear. I believe that
I'm working on the letter, Mr.
unparliamentary
Speaker.
behaviour.
Here, here. Thanks, Mr.
Hear,
Lincoln,
hear.
for your support.
Hear,
Yeah,
hear.
yeah. Thanks. Anyway,
Mr.
Mr. Speaker, point of order before we adjourn.
Yes, please.
I wish to notify you that quorum has been reached on all legislation.
Hear, hear.
Indeed, it has been reached, and the Parliament considers all of those documents and proposals passed as now effective immediately.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, I'm listening.
Mr. Speaker, I do beg to move that the only legislative chamber ever to exist that truly democratically represents the people of Enadia and is the only true democratic body to have ever been involved in Enadian law do hereby adjourn.
For the remainder of the day, sitting.
Indeed, hear, hear.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for presenting yourselves today, and best of luck to all of us.
Hear, hear.